I'm going to talk a little bit about Angular 2 and based on our journey in LiveChat, the company that I work for. We started our journey with Angular 2 something like 6 months ago. Then we decided to give it a try for our single page app, which we are creating for agents that are working with chats. So mainly it was written in Backbone before, and we started to implement new things with Angular 2. It was like Alpha 32 or something like that, the version. First hit on production was with Beta 0. So basing on that experience, I'm going to show you what you can improve in your Angular 2 apps and how to make use of it in the highest possible way, I guess. Okay, so the first really important question that you probably met somewhere is it worth to try now? Currently, at this moment, whether we can start writing app in Angular 2 or not. So that's the common question. And my opinion on that, yes, is yes. Simply yes, we can start making production-ready app, but we have to be aware of some things, like we have to follow all the changes that Angular team is making in the core, and we have to somehow make it in our schedule. So we have to think about it as time is money, so we have to include it in the schedule. And AngularJS became something like a successor of jQuery, so everybody writes app in AngularJS. And my first question is, have you ever written app in AngularJS? Please raise your hands. Okay. And have you tried to write something in Angular 2? Okay, that's good. Okay, so let's assume that we give Angular a try. So the problem is it's not the only choice to make before even starting to code, because there's plenty of subset of JavaScript languages, let's say like that, to choose. We have ECMAScript 5, which is in browsers. We have the next ECMAScript. We have TypeScript, Dart, and something like that. So we have a lot of options. But what's the problem? Angular is written in TypeScript. So I advise you go with TypeScript because of two things. One, the docs are now only available in TypeScript generally. There's a real lack of resources on ES5 and even ES6. And the second one is that the core itself is written in TypeScript, so it gives you much more possibilities to debug your code. And also, if you don't like types, you don't have to use it. That's a strange thing, because all about TypeScript is that it adds types to our JavaScript code, but it doesn't force you to add it. So if you don't want, you don't have to use it. Okay, the next thing before even starting up is some kind of build system. When you search over the internet, you probably met a JSPM. JSPM is package manager. They say the next generation package manager. And what problem does it solve over the standard NPM, Bower, and so on? So the problem is that it can basically import native ES6 modules and all other modules that are available over the internet, so AMD, CommonJS, and so on. So it can import it in the runtime. And the idea is great, and I know a few people who give it a try, and here's mainly two problems. One, this is really slow. So if you want to just wait for 30 seconds, let's say, to reload your app to see the changes, that's really a waste of time. Comparing it to hot reload that you have in React, for example. And the second problem is you still need a build system for some kind of tasks like, let's say, uglifying, making MD5s, and so on. Okay, so my advice here is you can use Webpack instead, which gives you similar possibilities. You can include any module you can, and even if version 2, there is native support for ES6. By the way, version 2 is in beta now, so be aware of that. And unfortunately, we don't have a hot module reload in Angular, so React wins this, really. This is a really nice feature when you have your code really included in runtime, so you don't have to wait, you don't have to reload even page when you change something in code. Okay, the Angular is really about the web components. You probably heard about that a lot of times. So what is the web component itself? It's about the specs, a set of specs, which includes custom elements, templates, HTML imports, and Shadow DOM. You probably know that AngularJS introduced something like directives, which are just custom elements with templates. You have HTML imports, which are ES6 imports. And the last thing is Shadow DOM. Okay, what really is Shadow DOM? It's something like encapsulating styles into some particular component. And now, how does it work in Angular 2? So by default, you have your code, your CSS code encapsulated inside the component. So let's say we have a template which has a div with class of hero, and we have some color applied to it. Now, what Angular does by default is something like this. It produces an attribute to particular element that we're creating to the component, and then rewrites the hero class, in this case, to something like that. And it works like we don't have it applied to any other element which even has the same name, so hero. This is cool because it works for every browser. We have encapsulation by default. We have something like Shadow DOM. But cool feature is that we can use a native Shadow DOM if you want to. There's one problem with that, because if browser doesn't support Shadow DOM, there's a problem because it shows an error. So you have to be aware of that, but you can use it in the newest versions of some browsers. So to do that, we can change the encapsulation to the view encapsulation native imported from Angular core. Okay, I have a little plank here to show you how it looks like in reality. Okay, so we have something like that. This is Shadow DOM, Shadow root, and you have a style tag, which was generated by the Angular core and applied only this style inside this shadow root. So the second hero was untouched, as you can see that here. Okay, we have a hero with color, and we have hero without it. Okay, that's quite nice stuff. But the question is if the Angular is this web component from the specs. So not really yet, because the specs is not complete, but Angular team said that it will be easily switchable to the native web components if it hits production. So probably it will look like just the Shadow DOM which I showed before. Okay, the next big thing that Angular introduces is completely rewritten change detection. So you probably seen something like that. Okay, that's the digest loop. And Angular 1 was checking if some changes were made using the digest loop, and then everything was two-way. There was two-way data binding, which is gone in Angular 1, in Angular 2, so it's also gone. So what's instead? So how does it work by default in Angular 2 if there's no digest loop? So all the thing about Angular 2 is that we now have a component tree. So this is like the React. We have a root component, which is an app component, and then we have children with some other rootable components probably, and so DAM components probably also. And then it ends up like this. So we have a component inside the component inside the component. So the problem is that default change detection works somehow like that. Let's assume that something changed in the component in the bottom, and Angular goes through all of the components and checks if something changed. You probably just noticed that something's wrong, because we probably know that only one component changed, but Angular by default is checking everything. So yeah, indeed, that's the problem. They stated that, okay, it's really, really fast. They can do hundreds of thousands checks like that, but still, conceptually, it's some kind of problem. Why is that? Okay, let's assume that we know that this one component changed, so we could do only this path and check only this path for changes. So with Angular 2, we are now able to do something like this. Okay, but the problem is how to achieve this. The problem why it works this way is immutability. So by default, that's the nature of JavaScript, that you can mutate objects. So you can change some property, but the reference of the object is still the same. So to check if object really changed, you have to go through order of the properties and compare it to themselves. So to resolve that problem, we have to introduce somehow immutable data. Okay, let's assume that our input to the component is immutable. So now we can make use of strategy which is called onPush, and how to apply it to the component. Okay, so we have an import still from Angular to core, and there's something called change detection strategy. And this change detection can be applied right to the component here and now. It makes something like this. Okay, so we just set Angular to check for changes only when something on input changes. There's another one which can fire the change detection when some event is fired inside the component. But generally, when you have some kind of DAM component, we can just use it in this way. So we have input which requires the new data to be new reference. So in this case, it dramatically speeds up the change detection. Okay, that's only for immutable inputs. Okay, I will show you a quick example. Yes, there is. Okay. So let's say we have something like this. There's an app. We have row, which is an ng4 of row data. And we just apply this array. Okay. There's an internet connection. So we have just some kind of list, which is pretty common use case. Okay, it's being rendered. And now, the problem is that we have a row without change detection. Okay, so what happens now? Let's see that we have a row data, which is getter. It shows us that we set just a watcher for our data property. So it means that every time that something changes in one component, it's being fired something like 300, 400 times. It's really, really bad. And we can tweak it just by using change detection if we know that the data that is as an input is immutable. Okay. So now it's being changed only one time, as we expect that to be. So my advice for that is please use this extensively. So if you have choice, it's better to put immutable data as an input to the component, and then you can speed up your app really, really quickly, and without losing so much, because immutable objects are also good to reason about. You don't have the mutation, you don't have some strange errors. So I strongly encourage you to use that. Okay. Even if we don't want to use, or we can't use immutable data, we also can in Angular 2 fire the change detection manually. It's a pretty cool feature because we have something which is called change detector ref. And if we inject it into the component, we can mark some component for check, like I did here. Okay, I said, like before, change detection strategy to unpush. But the problem is that now we have input which is not immutable object. So it's still the same, that's observable from Rx as an input, which holds the same reference. And now we can, on every subscribe to such an event in observable, can mark for check this component. So Angular, when sees something like this, then runs the change detection for the component. And it's also a cool feature because you can somehow simulate the previous behavior with manually marking some component to check. Okay. So last but not least, we have Rxjs in Angular 2 somehow built in, because Angular 2 core uses intensively Rxjs in the core, so we can make use of it in our application also. All we have to do is to import operators, which we will use in our app, because by default there's only Rxjs core imported. And what are really Rxjs? Rxjs is about observables, and observables are some kind of next generation of promises, because we can now resolve few times, let's say that, we can resolve it few times, we can cancel such observables, we can merge the streams and so on and so on. You have plenty of presentations today about the about observables, and Rxjs is one of the implementation of that. So you can make use of it. And one of the things that are included in Angular is HTTP service. Like it was before, in AngularJS, there was HTTP, which was, in fact, a promise. Now, in Angular 2, HTTP is observable by default. And we can make use of it, so subscribe to the HTTP GET in this case. And there's something really, really similar to that one that we used in a promises. And what's cool about Rxjs, we have plenty of operators, like, for example, retry. I'm not going to expand it. You can find a lot of operators, because using Rx is about using right operator for a right job. Okay, so I have some other ideas what you can read, what you can check out about Angular 2. So Angular 2 released some first version of CLI, which you can build application from a command line. You have server-side rendering. It's also made by core team, so it's still Angular. It's not like some kind of project that people do, which has nothing in common with core of the Angular. This is the project which is in Angular repository. So Angular Universal is a server-side rendering for some of the languages for now. Okay, if you like Redux from React, for example, you can still use Redux in Angular 2. You have some helpers like ng2 Redux and ngrx store, which is the second one. It's written on the top of Rxjs, and it's something a little bit different than the Redux itself, but shares the same idea. Yeah. Okay. You have some. You can do some mobile applications using Ionic 2, which uses under the hood Angular 2, and I also written some posts about testing because there are really no resources about testing Angular 2 apps for now. Okay, so wrapping it up, a little bit of a summary. So, what the Angular 2 really is? It's a really big solution for complex problems. So it's not like the single library that you can use for a specific job. It's more like a framework. It forces you to think rather Angular way, that's the JavaScript way, and use some kind of library additionally. So I advise you that you have to choose Angular 2 not for a really small project. I really strongly encourage you to use it for a bigger project when the team is bigger than 2 persons, for example. Okay, the next big plus of Angular is performance, because it's improved a lot. As you could see, the last year was, I guess, the year of React, so it took over the AngularJS because of performance. Because AngularJS in comparison was really slow. Angular 2 is very similar in case of performance to React. Okay, so as you could see, the components of Angular 2 can be tweaked to be even better in case of performance. And yeah, it is production ready, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Okay, as I said, it's really for bigger teams and bigger projects. Okay, so I have one more thing. This is the app that I was talking about. So this is a single-player application that currently shows our visitors on web page, and it's written. This view is written completely in Angular 2, so it works pretty well. We have these problems with performance here. So we have a lot of filters on the left side that are dynamically changing because someone comes and someone leaves our website. And that's really all. I would like to thank you. If you have any question, please ask them.
Can you tell us more about how Angular 2 is using observables and actually Rxjs, because it's the main dependency?
In core, or yeah, how you can use it?
In HTTP.
Okay, HTTP is really observable object, so you can use all of the stuff that is, for example, in some observable, it's called record, probably. And you have this also in event emitter of Angular when you have output from the component. This is also the subject of Rxjs. And that are the two main things that I can remember now.
Okay, I was asking because my presentation is next in the room. And I have a presentation about observables.
Michał will be talking about Rxjs also.
Another question?
Do you have maybe experience with migrating Angular 1 to Angular 2 application, or just do you think it will be easy, or it is in a plan of Angular 2?
Okay, you basically ask about migration from the Angular 1 to Angular 2, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so it is possible. Generally, Angular 2 was completely written from the bottom, and they said that it won't be even migration path or something like that, but after something like 6 months, they said, okay, there you have a migration path, there you have libraries that can help you somehow connect Angular 1 component with Angular 2 components. So yes, there are plenty of libraries there are 2 or 3. There's ng upgrade. You can also create Angular 1 app with syntax of Angular 2, something like that. And this is maintained by the core of Angular. So there's straight migration path strictly by the Angular team.
Hello, what about size of Angular 2? Because I heard it's pretty huge. There will be any plans to cut some kilobytes from Angular 2 file?
So right now, it's bigger than it was in Angular.js, but it's not so huge. They're still working on minification because that was not included in the alpha version and so on. Now it is changing, but it's not yet, let's say, minified as it should, yeah, because they're planning on minification even more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you.